Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have a panel discussion about creating equitable access to capital for Black-led and serving nonprofits. My name is Erin Clark, and I will be the MC for this panel today. I serve as Vice President of Master Site Development for a nonprofit real estate organization in Denver, Colorado called Urban Land Conservancy, or ULC. And your panelists today will be LaDawn Sullivan, who is the director of the BRIC Fund, which stands for Black Resilience in Colorado. And she is with the Denver Foundation, also here in Colorado. We will also have, then following LaDawn, will be Mark Marshall, speaking on the BRIC loan program here in the state of Colorado. He is recently, formerly, my colleague from ULC, and is now Vice President of Real Estate Development for another statewide nonprofit, Rocky Mountain Communities. And finally, we're going to hear from the other side of the nation in North Carolina, from Ethan Lindsay, who is Director of Community Philanthropy with the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. And he'll be speaking to us about the BIG Equity Fund. BIG is another acronym standing for Black Investments in Greensboro. So we're very excited about this. And with that, I'd like to start kicking us off with talking about kind of the why, the what and the why, and then our panelists will speak more to the why and the how of addressing what we're calling a giving gap. So I think a lot of us understand that there is a major funding gap between Black-led organizations and white-led organizations in terms of funding that they receive, and it's quite alarming. We have results from a recent study that showed that out of more than 140 nonprofit organizations, white-led groups had budgets that were a full 24% larger than those for organizations led by people of color. And when we look at the why, and we'll see this through our panel discussion today, a lot of that we can point to just lack of connections and relationships, that we're just not really speaking to each other across racial lines, and that the predominant funders are white-led and really have existing relationships with leaders of white organizations, and we want to really help, really need to address that discrepancy. Also, this really speaks to a systemic problem, just discrimination and racial biases in the processes in the first place. And some of that also speaks to why we don't have those relationships that we need to connect dollars and services and programs. We have some other data from the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy showing that there's just a continued underinvestment for the making of grants in Black communities. Altogether, only 1% of grant making from the 25 foundations that were surveyed here were specifically designated for Black communities, even though within those areas they had high populations of Black people. So again, why do we have this disconnect? How can we help bridge this gap? And one of the things for the how is to be able to address these hurdles. And we're looking, what we're going to see today is some recent efforts, again, both here in Colorado and in North Carolina, to try to bridge this gap, to create more equitable access to capital, the importance of having access to low interest capital for Black-led nonprofits to be able to serve our communities. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to LaDawn Sullivan to speak about Black Resilience in Colorado, or the BRIC Fund.
Thank you, Erin, and I'm so happy to be here today to share what has been a 9-month journey, but I would say more so a lifetime journey in addressing the inequities that our Black communities experience. So the Black Resilience in Colorado Fund actually was seeded over 7 years ago, but we unfortunately never had the kind of the right energy, the right recipe. And it took basically two pandemics, the COVID-19 pandemic and the escalation, and I would say the paralysis of escalated racial injustice of that literally was on all of our TV screens and our phones of the George Floyd murder. And so what really came to light at the Dimmer Foundation was the clear clarion call that Black-led and serving nonprofits were exacerbated by the historical under-resourcing. And in the time of these two pandemics, the Black community, as typical, comes to the organizations and those connections in their own community, because everyone, when in trouble, you go to those you trust. And so when we're seeing Black organizations being stretched to 300% an increase in the amount of folks that they were trying to serve with still very paltry resources available to them, this was kind of, as I said, the perfect disaster recipe for BRIC to be formed. BRIC was established on Juneteenth or June 20th of 2020. Our initial goal was to raise $1.5 million and mobilize $1 million to Black-led and serving nonprofit organizations. And that the Black nonprofit organizations that we were looking to support were across the 7-county Metro Denver area, which is where a significant majority of the Black population reside in Colorado. And that these resources, of course, were meant to be supportive of these critical organizations and institutions within the Black community, but also that these resources would help the Black community shift from surviving to thriving. And when I use that language, I'm really talking about addressing systemic racism and what that looks like, and organically under the leadership of Black community. And so the folks who are in leadership of the Black Resilience in Colorado Fund are Black leaders from a very diverse economic, lived experience, geographic, demographic, eclectic mix of folks who really are in lead of this work. And the dollars that have been raised and the resources that we've been able to gather in this very short 9 months have created opportunities for us to leverage the existing assets in the community. What we do recognize for BRIC, yes, of course, raising financial cash resources is important, but true to the history and culture of the Black community, we know that we live within the 5 T's of time, talent, treasure, testimony, and social ties. All those things are important for the progress of our people. And it's intrinsically built into our DNA of who we are in our village mentality for progress. That through BRIC, we're building organizational capacity for nonprofits and for nonprofit leaders in the Black community, for them to be able to fully live into their leadership, as well as for their organizations to be at a capacity in which they can truly serve the community as they desire. And then again, in times of crisis, which we have experienced, all of us have experienced over this last year plus, most directly, to have those resources in times of crisis. What I like to say about BRIC is that we are not an or, we are an and. Our expectation is that white-led funding institutions understand they still are called, they are accountable to play a significant role in resourcing communities who have been put in vulnerable positions because of systemic racism and oppression. But BRIC is an and, meaning we are an additional resource for, by, and with our own people. And that is critical to why we're here and why we look to be a perpetual resource in the Black community. So in slide, in our first 9 months, we've received just over $2 million in contributions. We have received within 2 grant cycles over 120 applications, and we have distributed just over $1 million. And we have about 61 Black-led and serving nonprofits who have received those grants. We also, so as I said before, that is the treasure piece, the financial piece that has been mobilized. But we're also talking about how we elevate time and talent and how we think about our social networks and use our voice. And we've done that through our capacity building work. We have a program that is now going into its 10th year that is now a part of the BRIC Fund, and that's our Executive Directors of Color Institute, in which we have about 120 alumni, and we have 33 participants in this year's class. And they're building their individual leadership as EDs of color, and they're building the capacity of their organization's internal operations. And so it's a 2-year program in which they participate in 8 sessions per year, but they also have access to mentoring, to small professional development grants, as well as opportunities to share and learn amongst themselves. And the fundamentals of what is important to have strong infrastructures for their organization, but also what it means to be an individual leader. And that is having, enhancing your skill set on community engagement and delegation, but also self-care. Because what we know, particularly for leaders of color, this is not something you get to turn off at 5 o'clock. You are definitely a part of the landscape as a person of color or a leader of color 24/7. And so that's something that is a strong part of what is built into the sessions and curriculum for that program. We also, in the last year through COVID and all virtual, have engaged 10 white-led and 10 Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led organizations to develop and strengthen and institutionalize their nonprofits' internal racial equity and inclusion policies and practices. We have provided small grants to these 20 organizations, but we've also created a cohort in which they learn and share together by meeting every other month, as well as connecting them to other resources such as consultants and or national or regional peers who have experience and lived in the work. This program each organization set one goal for their organization to move forward. And I will say, as of their presentations yesterday, they have all gone past their original goal and have really stepped into racial equity practices and policies with clear intention, not just on the staff level, but on their board level, that this is being institutionalized and put on paper, like built into their bylaws, built into the ways in which they work by their board, by their staff. And they're testing it and holding themselves accountable by checking with their constituencies. And so we're really excited about this work. And as I said, it is only just now wrapping its first year. And then we're also elevating conversations in regards to the power of Black giving and Black community progress and power. This is something, as my colleague who's also on the panel, Ethan Lindsay, we've been living in this work for over 20 years. And understanding, and I would say bringing understanding, not just to our white colleagues in the philanthropic field, but more so in our communities about the power of Black giving, that it lives, as I said before, it has historically and culturally lived in our DNA forever. It's how we mobilize and operate despite or in spite of obstacles that are put in our way because of racism and systemic oppression. But it's also the collective power of how we give. So when we're talking about, each one of us bringing something to the table and collectively pulling it together to make change in our community, the change that we would like to see, and building on the existing assets. And those are not just financial, but again, the things that we hold true and dear to what it means to be Black and how we mobilize as a unit and progress in spite of obstacles in our way. And then lastly, and most recently, we have launched the BRIC loan program in partnership with the Urban Land Conservancy. And my partner in loans, Mark Marshall, is going to speak about that.
Thank you, LaDon. As Aaron Clark mentioned a moment ago, as we sit around ULC era, and we, along with our president, former president, well, I'm formerly a ULC-er. As of two months ago, I joined Rocky Mountain Communities, and my former president and current ULC president, Aaron Maripol, Aaron and I, we're having a discussion, leading discussions at ULC about how we can play a part and contribute in what was clearly an unlevel playing field. Just a little background on ULC. ULC is a nonprofit located in Denver. It manages, develops, preserves, and stewards affordable apartment buildings or affordable housing, nonprofit office space, and community spaces for communities with lower income residents in it. And we're a mission-based organization. And I'll continue to say we because I'm gonna have a lot of, ULC is always gonna be part of who I am. So excuse the we in the presentation. So in addition to being mission-oriented, ULC has also got a bent towards social justice. And as the conversations were coming up about the unlevel playing field, one of the major hurdles we recognized that exist was that a lot of times the inability that organizations, nonprofits have to expand is based on access to capital and low interest capital. And we started the conversation, how can we get these funds available and out to these nonprofit groups here, specifically Black-led nonprofits here, Black-led and Black serving groups. So we started the conversation with the Denver Foundation. Denver Foundation and ULC have long ties and roots. ULC was originally a supporting member of the Denver Foundation. And we wanted to see, what can we do now to get a loan program in place to address some of these issues. In a recent study from the U.S. Department of the Chamber of Commerce here, it was found that minority-owned organizations and businesses generally forego applying for loans. And the main reasons that there's a fear of rejection, and there is also, fear is founded because minority-owned organizations are less likely to receive loans when they do apply. And when they apply and are granted, approved for loans, these loans generally come at a high interest rate than with other businesses and compared to non-minority counterparts. Okay, on the next slide, please. The BRIC Fund, and through this ULC partnership, we have an investment in, continues to be, ULC has an investment with the Denver Foundation of $250,000. And what we have focused on is being able to support Black-led and Black-serving 501c3s with low interest loans. And the program is around a $250,000 nonprofit loan program. The terms of this loan, it's a 1 to 5 year term on the loan here. The loans are either at 1% for loans that are less than 2 years. The interest rate's 1.5% for loans greater than two years. And the max loan is $10,000 to $50,000 here on the principal on these loans. And because ULC focuses on real estate, one of the things that focus of the portion of this loan is around capital improvements of the real estate, as well as the acquisition of equipment to support the businesses and the real property of these nonprofit groups. Next, please. We decided we're going to focus on 5 pillar areas: health, housing, job retention and transition, racial justice, and youth. COVID has shown a bright light on the inequities that exist in lower income and Black neighborhoods specifically, especially around health. We saw that large number of Black communities were disproportionately contacting the COVID virus, as well as the deaths. The death rate and contact among Black people were higher than the general population. So the BRIC loan funds are focused around racial trauma that's happened here, the organizations that address that. There's a lot of mental health issues that exist that need to be addressed across the board. So we know that's an issue. Infant and mother mortality rate, uninsured and insured, underinsured and uninsured individuals here, Medicaid eligible personnel, and COVID-related losses of benefits as it relates to health. On the housing side, once again, before the pandemic, Denver and the state of Colorado was in a housing crisis, in an affordable housing crisis. This was exacerbated by the COVID virus here. And we've seen a number of cases of displacement that's happening, involuntary displacement, gentrification of neighborhoods. So we want to be able to support renters and prevent some of the displacement that's happening, and work with people who are experiencing homelessness, especially our people, lower income population here in Denver, but it is, and across the state of Colorado, but it is imperative that we have funding available to support the organizations that are meeting the needs of this population. On the job retention and job training, these all, there's nothing on this list that COVID does not touch. In this area, there are many jobs that are out there that will not be coming back. So what we want to do is use some of these funding for training and retraining people and giving people an access to living wage jobs. Right now, there are a lot of people in the community who are in service jobs and not able to afford the increasing rents that are happening in this market specifically. But to the extent that we can provide services or dollars for these services and programming, that's playing a big part in reaching our goals here. The racial justice, as everyone knows from the recent George Floyd case here, this is an issue in America. We cannot escape it, so we have to face it. What kind of measures can we take? We need to support those organizations that are doing the community organizing, that are doing the advocacy work, the law, policy reform. Policy reform is a huge part of making the changes that we need in the long term to prevent the types of scenarios where we're watching a video on a every other day basis here of some of the racial injustices that are happening in the country. And finally, we're putting funding toward organizations that serve youth. These are youth organizing and youth-led organizations. And one of the things we know to be able to advance the community, our Black population, is we've got to provide better access for kids, from education through housing, access to good food, fresh food here. These all tie into what we're doing with the BRIC loan. And we know that by focusing on these 5 pillars, we can have a tremendous impact in Colorado. So thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to our next presenter, Ethan Lindsay.
You would think after all these Zoom meetings, you would remember to hit the unmute button, but it's always got to be one. And I guess I'm that one today. Thank you, Mark and LaDawn and Aaron. I'm glad to be here with everyone and representing the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, but more importantly, the Big Equity Fund, as we like to call it, but it's, as you can see, Black Investments in Greensboro. And this is an initiative of the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. Sometimes we see that word initiative and we think it's short term, but BIG is actually now it's going to be institutionalized, and I'll tell a little bit more about that story. If we could advance, please. Usually the objective I like to talk about when we're presenting BIG. You can see the BIG, the acronyms are kind of the theme here, but it's built on the 3 E's that I've developed over my career when I'm talking about big equity. They're important because this is actually how we got to this point. I usually call it expose, engage, and educate. So with big, we want to broaden exposure to the opportunity for people to be a part of big, but also be connected with the community foundation, and an opportunity for people to be donors. So we increase people's understanding of big and the evolution, and that leads to obviously engagement in what we like for people to become donors and champions for big. But as we go forward, and Aaron, you can give you some time to tee this up, but I think as I get deeper into it, I'd like to share with you a video that we're very proud of, and thanks to our partner, First Bank, our local bank, they actually provided the resources for this great video that's been produced that I'll be quiet and let you view.
Greensboro is a very caring community. Greensboro is a great community to raise a family.
We're very well known for education, for NCA&T, Guilford, UNCG, Greensboro College, Bennett College, GTCC.
Greensboro is a place with a lot of diversity. It's a community that I love. One of the things that became obvious to me early on is that I really wanted to help Greensboro be as great as it can be.
We really are going through a period of change, and I think that there's a big question as to what the identity of Greensboro is going to be going forward.
The idea is to create a corpus of capital that will then be infused back into the Black community and help dismantle socioeconomic disparity.
Greensboro, like a lot of communities, still has a lot of social segregation. So even though I've grown up here, there is a lot that I'm not familiar with in the community, and a lot that I don't know about the community. And that is a huge part of why I'm a donor to the Big Equity Fund.
The Big Equity Fund is a permanent endowment at the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. And it is the result of a group of Black leaders and Black donors coming together and sharing a common vision that we want to make life better for those in the Black community here. And so we've identified 3 priorities initially that we want to focus. One is on health disparities. Our second priority is related to education and the digital divide. And then the third issue that we've identified is small business ownership. There have been Black entrepreneurs in our community for years. More recently, anyone who has a business needs to know how to do digital marketing to sustain their business, to grow their business. So we want to be able to provide those support services to Black businesses so that they continue to grow.
We need to be able to put financial resources into the game to be able to level the playing field so that little kids that live in Greensboro have an opportunity to become educated, have good health, and actually achieve their best lives as opposed to fighting to survive.
We want to partner with existing organizations to collectively bring other Black organizations together to figure out how we can have a more collective approach as opposed to a siloed approach to getting the work done. We feel this is an opportunity for donors of color, and specifically with the Big Equity Fund, the Black community to come together and say, yes, we have resources, and yes, we want to use our influential capital, our reputational capital, our social capital, our financial capital, and intellectual capital to solve the issues in Greensboro.
We want the Big Equity Fund to pull the entire community foundation along so that everyone is aligned on this mission.
What I want to see is an enduring fund, an institution in Greensboro that will never go away, that people will love and continue to contribute to. Greensboro ends up being better than it's ever been if everybody can contribute to the greater good. But we need to start someplace, and so we're throwing the gauntlet down now here in Greensboro to try to start moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Aaron. I never grow tired of watching that video. It's pretty powerful and moving. Makes my job easier, but it also it gives life to the words that you see here on the screen. I'd like to take in the time to read those for yourself. But I want to talk briefly about the three principles in the video. You saw leading off Mae Douglas, the chair. You saw Sam Cohn, who's a big supporter, donor, but a member of the CFGG board of directors, and Dr. Henry Hank Smith, who we call Dr. Big Love, because he really is kind of the soul of it. And he always talks about it, that this is a heart condition. And literally for him, he's a cardiologist by training, but he's gotten so excited about Big. And we start off with that as a conversation starter, because all those folks involved are donors, but clearly we're very clear and intentional about Big. It's been Black initiated, Black funded, and Black led. But we also have people who, like Sam Cohn, who are supporters and believers in Big. And Big Equity, you see now the vision is to become an economic philanthropic powerhouse to transform educational health and the well-being of Black community. Our mission, to pool resources, leverage capital to break down systems that result in social economic disparities in the Black community. Our values, accountability, adaptive, collaborative, legacy, transformational. These are words, again, those interviews just give life to these words. But more importantly, this work was done by a committee, initially of a group of volunteers who met for the first time on February 28th, and then continued to do this work throughout the pandemic, which literally we were 2 weeks before everything shut down. But we just continue going forward with this. If you could go to the next slide. And it's important, all our steering committee members, as LaDawn has talked about, it taken 7 years for BRIC to come into existence. This has been work that's been nearly 20 years for me, but we started at the Community Foundation with this work in 2015 as a part of our expanded community giving work. But you see here on our chronology, 2018 is actually the first time we brought a group of influential Black donors and leaders together for a small dinner. It was during Black Philanthropy Month, and we had a guest speaker, a mentor of mine, Mayor Otis Johnson from Savannah, and we kind of tested the idea. The group came back and said, let's do something collectively around philanthropy on the tradition. But we were real clear that we weren't doing anything new. We were really recognizing that there was a Black philanthropic legacy, Black donors in Greensboro, like any other place. But we will be the first to admit at our institution that we just never had an opportunity to be very intentional, to focus on Black donors and getting them to utilize the Community Foundation as a tool. And that's been really important. That Big Equity Fund is established as an endowed fund at the Community Foundation. If you go forward in 2019, we continued to explore and had dinners. But by December of 2019, we actually had our first lead gifts made to Big Equity Fund. What was then, we were calling it Black Strategic Endowment, but it became known as the Big Equity Fund. Throughout the winter, we had a quiet, silent campaign, but it was probably the loudest silent campaign ever. And part of that, we talked about being Black initiated and Black funded. One of the things that I held steadfast on was that the first 250,000 of this fund needed to come from Black donors. That was very important, not only symbolically, but for posterity. But also, this was a time for us to really, really send a message that we wanted to show that it was out there. But more importantly, we were trying to expand the narrative and change the narrative of oftentimes who we think is a philanthropist and who's capable, who isn't. Most of folks never see themselves and they think that philanthropy is only for wealthy white people. But this was really important, but also for posterity's sake. I say this all the time, no one can ever say that this was not Black initiated, because in order to start the endowed fund at our foundation, it starts at 250, and we had that commitment. Continuing on through what became 2020, we all know what happened there, but we continue to work on this work, and thanks to support from Kellogg Foundation, as part of a cohort, Dawn and are part of the Catalyzing Community Giving, we were able to continue working with a coach, Lynetta Gilbert, but more importantly, we also employed a strategic communications coach, Nicole Merritt, who's helped us refine our message that was particular to the audiences that we wanted to work with, but also bring some additional capacity for me. But we continue through that, continue raising funds. And then of August 2020, despite this pandemic, and then things only accelerated after the social justice movement and the murder of George Floyd. But we like to point out that we had actually started this work before, so it wasn't a reaction, so to speak. It really accelerated our efforts, and we saw the need, even as Mark mentioned, the pandemic bore bear to the disparities and the inequities that we knew were there intuitively, but it really became into light in our communities and other places. But also something happened in August of 2020, where we came out again and for publicly kind of said that, yes, this is what's going on with Big Equity, made an announcement during Black Philanthropy Month with Mae Douglas and one of our board chairs, but also it was a very significant commitment by the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro. First time they had ever done anything like this, committed $250,000 to match what was raised by the Black donors, and to really, what I like to say, to be about the talk that at that time everybody was talking about what we're going to do after George Floyd. Well, this was an opportunity for us to step up and lean into it. But also, it played out something that I had talked to many of these donors about, that this is also about leverage. And as donors, when you come in as donors, and that's leverage and power, and institutions respond to that. And we're really clear about this. This is very unique and distinct, that we weren't coming to the foundation for a grant. We were coming to the foundation with an opportunity to leverage the wealth that was already there. That's key. That shows Black power, but that expands the narrative of what was going on. That's what, that's investment. But it's Black people leading with their dollars and going in. Something I always say is that you can talk all you want about equity and whatnot, but if you don't have representation, and you coming in and with a clear understanding that you're about investment, it changes the conversation. So those dollars as donors was representation, and it created an opportunity to have a different conversation. Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro has never done anything like this in its 30 plus year history. Fast forward, last thing I'll share about this, what also happened, kind of up to date. In a span of 6 months and through a pandemic, in February 20, in our announcement for Black History Month, we had reached an important milestone, $1 million raised towards a $3 million campaign. And we talk about the differences with Big Equity, different models. Unlike BRIC, we've made the choice, our steering committee's made the choice to focus on a $3 million endowment before there are any investments made. That's just decision that they made. People want to do, but $3 million. Fast forward, and I hope the chronology gives people a sense about the evolution. This is the fundraising progress today. We've reached over 30% of our goal towards the 3 million. It's pretty self-explanatory there. Can move forward. Please, Aaron. Mm-hmm. Why support BIG? This is something that we say here, but also for other efforts in your community. When you contribute to efforts like BRIC, but also BIG, it's something I like to say, you contribute to these because you believe in the possibilities to strengthen community giving, and particularly collectively. And I like to say that, again, for us big donors, we've had people make contributions as small as $10. We've had people send in a money order. For those of you who are familiar with a money order, yeah, that's pretty much, I know who those folks are. Those are my kinfolk. And you know, it takes a lot of effort and energy to go and send in a money order to a foundation. But that's really important. And that shows the diversity and recognizing the donors and the capacity that's out there. We have that range from those people who are using a money order to those folks who are making six-figure gift commitments out of their donor advised funds. So that's strengthening the community giving, and that's what we mean by that. And Mark, you know those money orders. That's a lot of work to do that. That's commitment. But this is also imagining Black philanthropy and expanding that narrative. But also, you heard Mae Douglas mention one of the things we want to focus on is fostering strategic alliances for leverage, and that's what we're talking about. The traditional organizations, Black civic organizations, Black leading organizations. Often we work in silos, and what we're talking about with BIG is that we don't want people to not keep doing what they're already supporting, but when it's coming into the community foundation and having something like BIG, what we're thinking about and what we envision is that BIG will be something that's adaptive, and that when we're looking down the road, and we call it passing gear philanthropy, we don't know what's going to be the need in 20 years, but this is exactly what we see people always being able to come together, and BIG could be on the forefront of leading an effort. Say we need a medical clinic, what have you. But also we want to highlight BIG is about replacing disparities by elevating equity. And we can go through, I got the signal there, we need to advance. Real quickly here, BIG, this is making a case. We have 3 focus areas initially. They're going to be focusing on health, the digital divide, but also businesses. When we're dealing with Black community, the disparities, we said you can reach in a bag and it doesn't matter where you focus on. The disparities are there, but it's really important, and I kind of led into this in my previous comments on the slide. We really want to focus to show that we're not going to be narrowly focused. This is what needs to be adaptive, and this just happens to be the things the focus areas for once we get the 3 million that we want to look at. And this is pretty much influenced by the pandemic. Aaron, we can move forward. How BIG works, I've talked about that, but it's the partnership with the Community Foundation, leveraging the expertise from someone like myself and LaDawn at the Denver you have staff there to work with, but it's also been leveraging with other donors who have an affinity and connection with the big equity mission. And when I say other donors, yes, that means we have white donors who are supporting this effort. And some have said this resonates with my values. And particularly in this time where people are confused and they don't know what to support, BIG was something great. They knew the community foundation, but and they saw this and it made sense and it was an opportunity. And we see that as bridge building. Move forward, please. BIG, I won't get into the details of this, but this is basically about the steering committee. This is volunteer. It's a steering committee of 12 currently right now, with room to go to 15. They are doing the governance and really going to be responsible for determining the first grant cycle. We're doing this collectively, but this isn't, LaDawn knows the history, right? This isn't quite like it's collective giving, but it isn't a giving circle, but it's more modeled after other strategic endowments. And you can imagine as we go forward, this type of work, we want it to be strategic, but it falls right in line with their other, we have a women's specific fund, which have different governance structures, but leadership and participation by members. But this is what we want to focus on. We want to have a more centralized governance group that makes the decisions about BIG. But it is an asset that is part of the community foundation. I encourage you all to go out and Google BIG, but here's what some others are saying. Our local media has really caught on to this, and the energy has been great. It's mobilized other people, donors, to where we have 112 donors to date. But I like to tell folks, please, this demonstrated that there's people are ready for this. Please advance, Aaron, thank you. This is just our steering committee members. We like to show this. Many of you may know some of these people, may not, but what we like for folks to do is focus on the diversity across sectors that we've brought together with that steering committee. We have entrepreneurs, owner of a Subway franchise, owner, a general contractor, banker representing finance, retired executive and donor, legal, entertainment, entrepreneur. Also, Dr. Hank, you heard about. Kendrick Mays works for the city. And we have Faith represented, and we have two seasoned nonprofit executives. Really highlight this just to show for our local community, people that are known, but more importantly, the diversity and the segments for ourselves, so we can have that multidisciplinary approach because we're going to be dealing with a lot of broad things. BIG, close with that. I hope when people see this logo, there's a story behind it. We work with a graphic artist. When she came back with this design, and when I saw those features, those beautiful wide nose, distinctive lips, I said, that's it. And she said, are you sure? I said, what do you mean you're sure? She said, well, some people might think that this is too Black. I said, well, it better be, because that's what this is about. But really, we think this logo actually, that's what got us started and energized. And just also, without a doubt, when you see that logo, you know this is who we're talking about, who this is for, but more importantly, who's initiated this and who's been leading the effort to fund this.
So thank you so much, LaDawn and Mark and Ethan. This is really exciting work you're all doing. And as you were talking, I was thinking, how I often say, don't talk about it, be about it. And that's really what Ethan was speaking to at the end there too, is just that, we've identified the problem, you've put on years of work, and now it's really bearing fruit and seeking to really repair our communities and help to address those gaps ourselves. And so I think that's so important. And with that, I think we'll turn things over to a question and answer period. And thank you so much for listening to these presentations.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you all. So we're happy to have you all here, and I'm just trying to see, I haven't seen any specific, actually, so just going through, we've been looking through the comments, and thank you all so much again for being here and for this presentation. We have had some questions, just some logistics things about the access to the slides. That is something that through NCRC, the slides that you saw today will be available and will be distributed. So we'll make sure that they have updated information, including contact information. Also, within the comment stream here, I believe we've shared the web addresses for the BRIC fund and for BIG, and also to the video that was shown here. So hopefully you all have seen that and have access to that as well. So with that, I'm not seeing any other questions. So I just want to kind of go back to our panelists in the few minutes that we have here, just to ask if there was anything else that, now that we've, gone through this and you've been able to, and we've been hearing from each other's programs, just, any additional information about kind of how these programs are coming together, or kind of similarities and differences between them, and how we can kind of build out a bigger ecosystem across the country for these types of efforts.
So I will say I saw somebody ask something about resources in the Seattle area. So just want to say that there are other similar funds that are emerging. I know several will be launching on Juneteenth. That seems to be a March day for these type of funds to be launched out in community. And at least for the BRIC fund, so for those, if you know of like initiatives or funds, please send them my way, because one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we are networked together. Ethan and I have been talking about this, about how we bring these similar funds together so that we can share and learn from each other, so that we can actually think about even a larger leveraging strategy across funds. We know that they'll be unique to their own local landscape or the landscape that they're serving, but there are some, we know that there'll be some similarities and things that we can learn from each other. One of the other things I'll say too, and just kind of in thinking about the Big Equity Fund and BRIC, is that I believe, and Ethan, please chime up if I'm speaking out of turn. The Big Equity Fund is taking a very intentional strategic approach in how they're raising their funds to build an endowment to then strategically invest those dollars, while BRIC is more like we're building the plane while we're flying it. And so we're mobilizing dollars and raising dollars and incorporating other parts of what BRIC is becoming, kind of, I don't want to say on the fly, because that makes it sound like we're not doing our homework, but in some ways, kind of as we're building and growing at the same time, but also trying to establish roots. So, and that's probably going to be, there'll be other funds that are very similar to the fund that Ethan is leading and the BRIC fund. So,
yeah, I concur with and agree with you, LaDawn. You said that correct. Just pointing back to people. Your local landscape better than any of us, and particularly your local institutions, what makes sense. And really, what I'd say the common denominator is that it's for Black communities by Black communities. So you start there, can't go wrong.
And as we noted, when we share out the PowerPoint following this, it will include contact information. But just for those who are here right now, LaDawn, would you be willing to just share your email address for people to reach out to you?
Sure. My email is lsullivan@denverfoundation.org. And I'll ask our our behind the scenes person, if they want to share that in the chat, they're welcome to. Happy to chat with folks. The other thing I wanted to just quickly add as well is that, like even with the BRIC loan fund that I'm working on with Mark, we recognize, we have to be flexible because because we're working to be intentional, proactive, but also responsive to the community's needs and what will be most helpful in helping them to be able to, as I said in our presentation, take the best and full advantage of what we have to offer. So we're talking about capital improvements, but that I think and Mark, please chime in. We are open. That is not something that we're just super finite, because we recognize that this is a unique opportunity and resource, and we want to be as flexible as possible, to be as supportive as possible when you're when you're creating a space in which in other more traditional terms, these folks would not have access.
Yeah, and I would agree, LaDon, on that. We do want to look beyond just the capital improvements for things like rental assistance in some cases. Sometimes it's for purchase of equipment. And we do really want to make a low barrier to entry on this. And I think the application, as we've outlined it and set it up, really gives people a great opportunity to access the funds and access the information. And the parameters that we're putting on loan approval is far less than they would get in any bank that anyone that's applying would go to. So I think we've got a good tool in place here, and have got a few of our first loans through the capital part of the actual loan program coming through. So we're excited about that.
Quickly, my email address, Lindsay, and it's all A's, LINDSAY, at cfgg.org. Or if you put in Big Equity Fund on a search, I'm sure you will find us, Big Equity Fund in Greensboro.
Thank you, Ethan. And that has now been added to the chat as well, along with Mark Marshall's email address. So please, I know that all of our panelists are, this networking is key. We started this out talking about the relationship building, and that is so important. And so some of that starts right here. We have one other question. I think it'll probably be our last question, just about kind of specifically for the BRIC fund and the big loan fund. How much should philanthropy be investing in your work on an annual basis? What is the real goal there? And you know who that came from, Ms. LaDon.
Well, I think that investment, when we say philanthropy, first of all, we have to define that. Institutional philanthropy. I think earlier we shared something very important. So I'd say at least beyond the 1%. But we have to also understand fundamentally with Big Equity Fund, this is exactly, Big Equity is a response to the lack of funding that goes to Black-led, Black-serving nonprofits. So I just real clear and say that we're more interested in what people are going to do individually to support our fund, so we could then change the landscape and support and lead efforts. So, anything's going to be better than the 1%, but also we realize that the power of what we're talking about is getting individuals, particularly people from their communities, realize that they're donors, and that changes the conversation and puts us in place to go and have a real conversation and say to other foundations and say that, you know what, we're doing far greater than you are with your numbers. It's a different kind of conversation that we can lead in, and saying that Black donors are doing their part, step up to the plate in an equitable way. It's not equal amount, equal sacrifice, but we need to move that 1%.
Yeah, I would agree with Ethan. And I will say this, this may be a little off, but I think Ethan did a great job answering the question. So I'll do an and. And I would say to institutional philanthropy, that the bigger thing, at least for me, what I'm seeing is what, sometimes we have traditional philanthropy has moments of clear focus on something, and then it will change quickly. And what I'm asking for is for the focus to remain. This cannot be a one-off situation. This needs to be long-term, sustainable. When folks are talking about we're going to increase our giving this year over the next 5 years, the conversation now needs to be how do we sustain that elevated giving in perpetuity, or until literally there is racial equity throughout our entire country. That the communities that have been most greatly affected by racism and oppression actually are truly in an equitable situation with their white community peers, with their white business peers. You could talk about this on and on, but I think that that's one of the most critical pieces, is not to have this immediate pivot. We need to stay focused, and we need to stay right here.
Yep. And go beyond that 1%.
Yes, well beyond the 1%. Let's get some double digits up in here. At least.
Oh, I thought we had to cut this off, but we do have one other question that we'd love to get to, and we've been given the go-ahead to do that. And I want to address this to LaDawn, kind of the relationship between the BRIC Fund and the Denver Foundation. The question is, have funds like the BRIC Fund developed different selection criteria for grant making? And do you hope to share what you learned with the parent organization to influence their grant making?
So yes, absolutely, and amen. So we're already influencing. I think I said this in the presentation, but I often say BRIC is all about ensuring that we're living out this mindset of moving from testing to trusting. So we have whittled down our grant making process to the bare essentials to understand the organization, what it offers, what they're doing in the community, how they see their impact, and what their needs and what their resource needs are in order to do great work, but not putting them in a position where we're testing them and creating an overt power and privilege dynamic between BRIC and the organizations that we work with and support in the community. We're really working in partnership. And that goes with the reporting. Typically foundations ask for reporting, and there's very specific ways in which we do that. We are creating a space in which we will share and learn together, and it will most likely be in person with a scribe. Quite frankly, I've been in the foundation role for over 20 plus years, and I cannot tell you anything from reports I have read that have come in from organizations. What I remember are the conversations I've had around the table about their work, about the people that they serve, and about their dreams and vision for what they want to do and how they want to do it. That's what I remember, and that's what I take with me, and that's what really informs how I see connectivity and partnership with them. So, and that definitely has lived in the Denver Foundation for my length of time there, but even more so right now as we've been navigating this very unique and focused space for the last 9 months. So.
Thank you, LaDawn. Ethan, did you want to add to that with respect to your organization, or?
Nope. She handled it, and our work is still developing, emerging to be strategic and lining up with that. But one of the things I'll just add to it is that the beauty of why I'm doing this in philanthropy is adaptability. We don't know what's relevant today may not be relevant 5 years from now. And what's been helping folks understand is that imagine if we would have had big equity or BRIC in place 20 years ago when a pandemic came and everything else. So we're forward thinking, but more importantly, that's the beauty of philanthropy. We get to be adaptive, and that is just so critical and allows you to be, that's strategic in itself, to be adaptive.
Well, thank you all. Just any final thoughts or from anything that you all left out or that you feel you want to amplify now?
I'll just put my final comment in. It's just gratifying for us at ULC and Rocky Mountain to be able to provide this type of funding specifically around facilities and around land use and facility use and building use, because there's very few times that you come across funding dollars that are specifically set aside for that. So for us to be able to participate in the BRIC fund and the loan portion of this is really incredible for us. So thanks, Ed.
Yeah. Aaron, I would just say, just as maybe a closing note, is that I know there are different folks who are in different sectors involved in this conference. And I would just say, let's work together to think outside the box. I mean, this partnership for this loan fund is definitely outside of the box of what I've seen in relationship to, the fund work that I've done through the foundation, funding work I've done through the foundation over the few years. But I think that there's even further and, bigger things that we could be doing. So I just encourage folks to, think about your organization, your foundation, your business, whatever you're doing, to think about how a partnership, what it could look like, what the skills or different assets of your organization may have to offer to work together for the greater good of the work that we're doing, the Big Equity Fund or with BRIC. We're open to ideas. We could figure it out. So thank you.
Thank you.
I love that. Thank you all so much again. Really speaking to that can-do attitude and having a growth mindset and being solutions and oriented. And, that's what we all need to do. And so thank you for showing the way and being leaders in this field. So with that, we will thank you all again for participating today, and please do reach out and go to these websites and learn more and connect and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everybody.